Theosophy and H.P.B. articles by H.P. Blavatsky. What of phenomena? Are three objects philosophers and philosophicules. The tidal wave. Why I do not return to India, she being dead yet speak. The H.P. Blavatsky series number 32. Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Ltd. Bangalore 560,004. Objects of the Theosophical movement. I to form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color, 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study, and 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. The articles of H.P. Blavatsky and W.Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by the Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. 1 reprint edition, 1986 BS by courtesy, the Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California. 90,007, USA. Printed by V.N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560,009 and published by J.M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560,004. With the help of a few associates, supporters, and friends, H.P. Blavatsky launched the Theosophical movement in the world in 1875, in the face of the massive prejudice of 19th-century materialism in science and the indifference or antagonism of complacent religion. As a reviver and teacher of what she called the wisdom religion, which she identified as a body of knowledge, the source of all the great religious philosophies of antiquity, and as known to living men of high evolutionary development in the present, she was confronted by multiple difficulties. Not only had she to deal with the stereotyped unbelief, oft hedged itself the product of long centuries of anti-intellectual bigotry and moral corruption in Western religion, but there were also the built-in psychological barriers in the minds of people who, while longing for instruction in occult mysteries, had no conception at all of the cost in personal discipline and commitment of such an opportunity. Finally, she had to teach under the conditions of the distrustful, skeptical atmosphere of a civilization which prided itself on the sturdy independence of its newborn scientific method and believed wholeheartedly in the general competence of rational inquiry to reach adequate final conclusions concerning the nature of things. The articles here presented have been chosen as to some degree illustrating how H.P.B. met these difficulties and what she did to explain the inevitable contradictions and problems of theosophical education. In this collection, the articles are arranged in chronological order. What of Phenomena, appeared in Lucifer for February, 1888, 13 years after the founding of the Society in New York. In this brief discussion, H.P.B. gives the reason for the occult demonstrations attending the early days of the movement, and an explanation of the limited educational value. An adept phenomena, an occultist can produce phenomena, but he cannot supply the world with brains, nor with the intelligence and good faith necessary to understand and appreciate them. In Our Three Objects, first published in Lucifer, September, 1889, H.P.B. pointed out why, nonetheless, the phenomena were important at the outset. They provided a certain body of proof that adepts exist and that adeptship is a logical necessity in the natural order of human development. This, in turn, helped the West to a worthier ideal of man's potentialities than it before possessed. Our Three Objects gives insight into H.P.B's way of judging the services of the Theosophical movement to the world, and makes plain, also, what in her view is the ground of all its successes: our recognition of the fact of the higher self, colorless, cosmopolitan, unsectarian, sexless, unworldly, altruistic, and the doing of our work on that basis. Philosophers and Philosophicules, Lucifer, October 1889, faces head-on the charge that the Theosophical Society in practice belied its constitution and rules by adopting or disseminating the teachings of the wisdom religion, since the Society declared that it had no particular doctrines or philosophy to advocate. Here H.P.B. was in the somewhat embarrassing position of having to show that the attraction held for members of the Society in the West by her own writings and expositions created no dogma for the Society in general, since no one was obliged to accept or study the writings of H.P.B. Curiously enough, it was the skeptical West which recognized in H.P.B. the stature of a true teacher. In Europe and America she found students and disciples who would cleave to her instruction and profit by her many works expounding and illustrating the doctrines of the wisdom religion, which is, as this article makes abundantly clear, essentially a method of investigation, a self-reliant search for the good and the true, rather than any particular off-print or version of accumulated knowledge. Yet had not H.P.B. recorded in her books and articles a vastly informing and luminously inspiring account of what the fraternity of adepts has found to be true, the inquirer of the 19th and 20th centuries would have been left without a compass in a sea of sublime exhortations to find his own way. It was this paradox which H.P.B. resolved by her life and in her role as teacher, while preserving, as best she could, the democratic view of truth-seeking declared in the Charter of the Society. Thus she dealt with a twofold human responsibility, to think for oneself, yet be able to recognize a greater wisdom than one's own, wherever it exists, and to be willing to learn. Both principles are honored by H.P.B. Indeed, a vital part of her work was in showing that neither principle can be ignored without fatal distortion to the other. Keeping the two in balance is the art of philosophy and the practice of true discipleship. In the tidal wave, published in Lucifer for November, 1889, H.P.B. helps her readers to see beyond the doctrinal aspect of theosophy to those wider aspects in motive and humanitarian intent of labors for the cause of mankind. She makes plain the immeasurable contribution of novelist reformers such as Dostoevsky, honoring de Cansandov and Émile Zola Thackeray for their influence in awakening their times. Never sectarian in her outlook, H.P.B. spoke of the incalculable services of such writers and urged theosophists to follow their example. According to what talent they may possess, exposing in impersonal narrative the crying vice and evils of the day, by word and deed, by publications and practical example. Why one do not return to India, a letter written in April, 1890, but not published in the Theosophist until the issues of January, 1922. Gives insight into the conditions under which agents of fraternity of adepts are sometimes obliged to work, and a measure of the price exacted for the privilege of attempting to penetrate and dispel some of the clouds of ignorance overshadowing the world. This letter will be best understood after a reading of the Theosophical Movement 1875 to 1950, the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California, 1951, and in connection with the article, Philosophers and Philosophicules. It is of some importance to note here, that in the India of today there is a viable body of theosophical students who are wholly loyal to H.P.B., regarding her as their teacher, and working for the movement in several centers of the great subcontinent. She being dead yet speaketh, printed in the Path for June, July, and August, 1892, hardly needs comment. Here is no article, but poignant access to the vision, the hopes, and the sacrifices of the teacher of Theosophy in the 19th century. From these extracts and recovered fragments we come to understand why William Q. Judge called H.P.B. a lion-hearted colleague, and to learn, almost at first hand, how practically defenseless Arethosa commit themselves to the mission of an H.P.B. What of phenomena? To the editors of Lucifer, I avail myself of your invitation to correspondence, in order to ask a question. How is it that we hear nothing now of the signs and wonders with which Neo-Theosophy was ushered in? Is the age of miracles past in the society? Yours respectfully, O occult phenomena, is what our correspondent apparently refers to. They failed to produce the desired effect, but they were, in no sense of the word, miracles. It was supposed that intelligent people, especially men of science, would, at least, have recognized the existence of a new and deeply interesting field of inquiry and research when they witnessed physical effects produced at will, for which they were not able to account. It was supposed that theologians would have welcomed the proof, of which they stand so sadly in need in these agnostic days, that the soul and the spirit are not mere creations of their fancy, due to ignorance of the physical constitution of man, but entities quite as real as the body, and much more important. These expectations were not realized. The phenomena were misunderstood and misrepresented, both as regards their nature and their purpose. In the light which experience has now thrown upon the matter, the explanation of this unfortunate circumstance is not far to seek. Neither science nor religion acknowledges the existence of the occult, as the term is understood and employed in theosophy, in the sense, that is to say, of a supermaterial, but not supernatural, region, governed by law, nor do they recognize the existence of latent powers and possibilities in man. Any interference with the everyday routine of the material world is attributed, by religion, to the arbitrary will of a good or an evil autocrat, inhabiting a supernatural region inaccessible to man, and subject to no law, either in his actions or constitution, and for a knowledge of whose ideas and wishes mortals are entirely dependent upon inspired communications delivered through an accredited messenger. The power of working so-called miracles has always been deemed the proper and sufficient credentials of a messenger from heaven, and the mental habit of regarding Ghani occult power in that light is still so strong that any exercise of that power is supposed to be miraculous, or to claim to be so. It is needless to say that these way of regarding extraordinary occurrences is in direct opposition to the scientific spirit of the age, nor is it the position practically occupied by the more intelligent portion of mankind at present. When people see wonders, nowadays, the sentiment excited in their minds is no longer veneration and awe, but curiosity. It was in the hope of arousing and utilizing this spirit of curiosity that occult phenomena were shown. It was believed that this manipulation of forces of nature which lie below the surface that surface of things which modern science scratches and pecks at so industriously and so proudly would hobble to inquire into the nature and the laws of those forces, unknown to science, but perfectly known occultism. That the phenomena did excite curiosity in the minds of those who witnessed them, is certainly true, but it was, unfortunately, for the most part of an idle kind. The greater number of the witnesses developed an insatiable appetite for phenomena for their own sake, without any thought of studying the philosophy or the science of whose truth and power the phenomena were merely trivial and, so to say, accidental illustrations. In but a few cases the curiosity which was awakened gave birth to the serious desire to study the philosophy and the science themselves, and for their own sake experience has taught the leaders of the movement that the vast majority of professing Christians are absolutely precluded by their mental condition and attitude, the result of centuries of superstitious teaching, from calmly examining the phenomena in their aspect of natural occurrences governed by law. The Roman Catholic Church, true to its traditions, excuses itself from the examination of any occult phenomena on the plea that they are necessarily the work of the devil, whenever they occur outside of its own pale, since it has a lawful monopoly of the legitimate miracle business. The Protestant Church denies the personal intervention of the evil one on the material plane, but, never having gone into the miracle business itself, it is apparently a little doubtful whether it would know a bona fide miracle if it saw one, but, being just as soon as its elder sister to conceive the extension of the reign of law beyond the limits of matter and force, as known to in our present state of consciousness, it excuses itself from the study of occult phenomena on the plea that they lie within the province of science rather than of religion. Now science has its miracles as well as the Church of Rome, but, as it is altogether dependent upon its instrument maker for the production of these miracles, and as it claims to obtain possession of the last known word in regard to the laws of nature, it was hardly to be expected that it would take very kindly to miracles, in whose production apparatus is no part, and which claim to instance soft the operation of force and laws of which it has no knowledge. Modern science, moreover, labors under disabilities with respect to the investigation of the occult quite as embarrassing as those of religion, for, while religion cannot grasp the idea of natural law as applied to the supersensuous universe, science does not allow the existence of any supersensuous universe at all to which the reign of law could be extended, nor can it conceive the possibility of any other state of consciousness than our present terrestrial one. It was, therefore, hardly to be expected that science would undertake the task it was called upon to perform with much earnestness and enthusiasm, and, indeed, it seems to have felt that it was not expected to treat the phenomena of occultism less cavalier light-hand it had treated divine miracles. So it calmly proceeded at once to pooh-pooh the phenomena, and, when obliged to express some kind of opinion, it did not hesitate, without examination, and on hearsay reports, to attribute them to fraudulent contrivances, wires, trapdoors, and so forth. It was bad enough for the leaders of the movement, when they endeavored to call the attention of the world to the great and unknown field for scientific and religious inquiry which lies on the borderland between matter and spirit, to find themselves set down as agents of a satanic majesty, or as superior adepts in the charlatan line, but the unkindest cut of all, perhaps, came from a class of people whose own experiences, rightly understood, ought certainly to have taught them better. The occult phenomena were claimed by the spiritualists as the work of their dear departed ones, but the leaders in Theosophy were declared to be somewhat less even than medium in disguise. Never were the phenomena presented in any other character than that of instances of a power over perfectly natural though unrecognized forces, and incidentally over matter, possessed by certain individuals who have attained to a larger and higher knowledge of the universe than has been reached by scientists and theologians, or verb reached by them, by the roads they are now respectively pursuing. Yet this power is latent in all men, and could, in time, be wielded by anyone who would cultivate the knowledge and conform to the conditions necessary for its development. Nevertheless, except in a few isolated and honorable instances, never was it received in any other character than as would-be miracles, or as works of the devil, or as vulgar tricks, or as amusing gape-seed, or as the poor performances of those dangerous spooks that masquerade in seance rooms, and feed on the vital energies of mediums and sitters. And, from all sides, Theosophy and Theosophists were attacked with a rancor and bitterness, with an absolute disregard alike of fact and logic, and with malice, hatred, and uncharitableness that would be utterly inconceivable, did not religious history teach us what mean and unreasoning animals ignorant men become when their cherished prejudices are touched, and did not the history of scientific research teach us, in its turn, how very like an ignorant man a learned man can behave, when the truth of his theories is called in question? An occultist can produce phenomena, but he cannot supply the world with brains, nor with the intelligence and good faith necessary to understand and appreciate them. Therefore, it is hardly to be wondered at, that word came to abandon phenomena and let the ideas of Theosophy stand on their own intrinsic merits. Our three objects, all the performances of the human heart at which we look with praise or wonder, are instances of the resistless force of perseverance. It is by this that the quarry becomes a pyramid, and that distant countries are united by canals. Operations incessantly continued, in time surmount the greatest difficulties, and mountains are leveled and oceans bounded by the slender force of human beings. Johnson. So it is, and must be always, my dear boys. If the angel Gabriel were to come down from heaven and had a successful rise against the most abominable and unrighteous vested interest which the poor old world groans under, he would most certainly lose his character for many years, probably for centuries, not only with upholders of the said vested interest, but with the respectable mass of people he had delivered. Hughes post nubila Phoebus. After the clouds, sunshine. With this, Lucifer enters upon its 5th volume, and having borne her share of the battle of personalities which has been raging throughout the last volume, Theodore feels as though she has earned the right to a period of peace. In deciding to enjoy that, at all costs, hereafter, she is moved as much by a feeling of contempt for the narrow-mindedness, ignorance, and bigotry of her adversaries as by a feeling of fatigue with such wearisome inanities. So far, then, as she can manage to control her indignation and no too placid temperament, she will henceforth treat with disdain the calumnious misrepresentations of which she seems to be the chronic victim. The beginning of a volume is the fittest time for a retrospect, and to such we now invite the reader's attention. If the outside public know Theosophy only as one half sees a dim shape through a Theosophist battle, the members of our society at least ought to keep in mind what it is doing on the lines of its declared objects. It is to be feared that they overlook this, amid the din of this sensational discussion of its principles, and the calumnies leveled at its officers. While it narrower minded off the secularists, Christians, and spiritualists vie with each other in attempts to cover with opprobrium one of the leaders of Theosophy, and to belittle its claims to public regard, the Theosophical Society is moving on in dignity towards the goal it set up for itself at the beginning. Silently, but irresistibly, it is widening the circle of usefulness and endearing its name to various nations. While its traducers are busy at their ignoble work, it is creating the facts for its future history. It is note in polemical pamphlets or sensational newspaper articles that its permanent record will be made, but in the visible realization of its original scheme of making a nucleus of universal brotherhood, reviving Oriental literature and philosophies, and aiding in the study of occult problems in physical and psychological science, the society is barely 14 years old. Yet how much has it not accomplished? And how much that involves work of the highest quality our opponents may not be inclined to do justice, but our vindication is sure to come later on. Meanwhile, let the plain facts be put on record without varnish or exaggeration. Classifying them under the appropriate headings, they are as follows: I. Brotherhood. When we arrived in India, in February, 1879, there was no unity between the races and sects off the peninsula, no sense of a common public interest, no disposition to find the mutual relations between the several sects of ancient Hinduism, or that between the creeds of Islam, Jainism, Buddhism, and Zoroastrianism. Between the Brahmanical Hindus of India and their kinsmen, the modern Sinhalese Buddhists, there had been no religious intercourse since some remote epoch. And again, between the several castes of the Sinhalese, for, true to their archaic Hindu parentage, the Sinha, do still cling to caste despite the letter and spirit of their Buddhist religion. There was a completed no intermarriages, no spirit of patriotic homogeneity, but a rancorous sectarian and caste ill-feeling as for any international reciprocity in either social or religious affairs. Between the Sinhalese and the northern Buddhistic nations, such a thing had never existed. Each was absolutely ignorant of and indifferent about the other's views, wants or aspirations. Finally, between the races of Asia and those of Europe and America there was the most complete absence of sympathy as to religious and philosophical questions. The labors of the Orientalists from Sir William Jones and Burnock down to Prof. Max Muller, had created among the learned a philosophical interest, but among the masses not even that. If to the above we add that all the Oriental religions, without exception, were being asphyxiated to death by poisonous gas of Western official science, through the medium of the educational agencies of European administrations and mission propagandists, and that the native graduates and undergraduates of India, Ceylon, and Japan had largely turned agnostics and revilers of the old religions. It will be seen how difficult a task it must have been to bring something like harmony out of this chaos, and make a tolerant if not a friendly feeling spring up and banish these hatreds, evil suspicions, ill feelings, and mutual ignorance. 10 years have passed, and what do we see? Taking the points seriatim, we find that throughout India unity and brotherhood have replaced the old disunity. 125 branches of our society have sprung up in India alone, each a nucleus of our idea of fraternity, a center of religious and social unity. Their membership embraces representatives of all the better castes and all Hindu sects, and a majority are of that class of hereditary savants and philosophers, the Brahmins, to pervert whom to Christianity has been the futile struggle of any missionary and self-appointed task of that high-class forlorn hope, the Oxford and Cambridge missions. The president of our society, Colonel Alcott, has traversed the whole of India several times, upon invitation, addressing vast crowds upon theosophic themes and sowing the seed from which, in time, will be garnered the full harvest of our evangel of brotherhood and mutual dependence. The growth of this kindly feeling has been proven in a variety of ways. First, in the unprecedented gathering of races, castes, and sects in the annual conventions of the Theosophical Society. Second, in the rapid growth of a theosophical literature advocating our altruistic views, in the founding of various journals and magazines in several languages, and in the rapid cessation of sectarian controversies. Third, in the sudden birth and phenomenally rapid growth of the patriotic movement which is centralized in the organization called the Indian National Congress. This remarkable political body was planned be certain for Anglo-Indian and Hindu members after the model and on the lines of the Theosophical Society, and has from the first been directed by our own colleagues, men among the most influential in the Indian Empire. At the same time, there is no connection whatever, barring that through the personalities of individuals, between the Congress and its mother body, our society. It would never have come into existence, in all probability, if Colonel Alcott had suffered himself to be tempted into the side paths of human brotherhood, politics, social reforms, etc., as many have wanted him to do. We aroused the dormant spirit and warmed the Aryan blood of the Hindus, and one vent the new life made for itself was this Congress. All this is simple history and passes unchallenged. Crossing over to Ceylon, behold the miracles our society has wrought, upon the evidence of many addresses, reports, and other official documents heretofore brought under the notice of our readers and the general public. The castemen affiliating, the sectarian ill-feeling almost obliterated, 16 branches of the society formed in the island, the entire Sinhalese community, one may almost say, looking to us for counsel, example, and leadership, a committee of Buddhists going over to India with Col. Alcott to plant a coconut, ancient symbol of affection and goodwill, in the compound of the Hindu temple in Tinnevelly, and Kandyan nobles, until now holding aloof from the Low Country people with haughty disdain of their feudal traditions, becoming presidents of our branches, and even traveling as Buddhist lecturers. Ceylon was the foyer from which the religion of Gautama streamed out to Cambodia, Siam, and Burma. What then, could be more appropriate than that there should be born from this holy land a message of brotherhood to Japan? How this message was taken, how delivered by our president, and with what magnificent results, is too well known to the whole Western world to need reiteration of the story in the present connection. Suffice is to say, it ranks among the most dramatic events in history, and is the all-sufficient, unanswerable, and crowning proof of the vital reality of our scheme to beget the feeling of universal brotherhood among all peoples, races, kindreds, castes, and colors. One evidence of the practical good sense shown in our management is the creation of the Buddhist flag as a conventional symbol of the religion. Apart from all sectarian questions, until now the Buddhists have had no such symbol as the cross affords to the Christians, and consequently have lacked that essential sign of their common relation to each other, which is the crystallizing point, so to say, of the fraternal force our society is trying to evoke. The Buddhist flag effectually supplies this want. It is made in the usual proportions of national ensigns as to length and width, and composed of 6 vertical bars of colors in the following order: sapphire blue, golden yellow, crimson, white, scarlet, and a bar combining all the other colors. This is no arbitrary selection of hues, but the application to this present purpose of the tints described in the old Pali and Sanskrit works as visible in the psychosphere or aura, around Buddha's person, and conventionally depicted as chromatic vibrations around his images in Ceylon and other countries. Esoterically, they are very suggestive in their combination. The new flag was first hoisted on our Colombo headquarters, then adopted with acclaim throughout Ceylon, and being introduced by Colonel Alcott into Japan, spread throughout that empire even within the brief term of his recent visit. Calumny cannot obliterate or even belittle the least of these facts. They have passed through the fog of today's hatred into the sunshine which lights up all events for the eye of the historian. 2. Oriental philosophy, literature, etc. No one unacquainted with India and the Hindus can form a conception of the state of feeling among the younger generation of college and school-bred Hindus towards their ancestral religion, that prevailed at the time of our advent there, 10 years ago. The materialistic and agnostic attitude of mind towards religion in the abstract, which prevails in Western universities, had been conveyed to the Indian colleges and schools by their graduates, the European professors who occupied the several chairs in the latter institutions of learning. The textbooks fed the spirit, and the Ducat Hindus, as a class, were thoroughly skeptical in religious matters, and only followed the rites and observances of the national cult from considerations of social necessity. As for the missionary colleges and schools, their effect was only to create doubt and prejudice against Hinduism and all religions, without in the least winning regard for Christianity or making converts. The cure for all this was, of course, to attack the citadel of skepticism, scientific scientism, and prove the scientific basis of religion in general and of Hinduism in particular. This task was undertaken from the first and pursued to the point of victory, a result evident to every traveler who inquires into the present state of Indian opinion. The change has been noted by Sir Richard Temple, Sir Edwin Arnold, Mr. Kane, MP Lady Jersey, Sir Monier Williams, the Primate of India, the bishops and archdeacons of all presidencies, the organs of the several missionary societies, the principals and professors of their colleges, the correspondents of European journals, a host of Indian authors and edi. Tours, Congress of Sanskrit Pandits, and has been admitted in terms of fervent gratitude in multitudes of addresses read to Colonel Olcott in the course of his extended journeys. Without exaggeration or danger of contradiction, it may be affirmed that the labors of the Theosophical Society in India have infused a fresh and vigorous life into Hindu philosophy, revived the Hindu religion, won back the allegiance of the graduate class to the ancestral beliefs, created an enthusiasm for Sanskrit literature that shows itself in their publication of old encyclopedias, scriptures, and commentaries, the foundation of many Sanskrit schools, the patronage of Sanskrit by native princes, and in other ways. Moreover, through its various literary and corporate agencies, the Society has disseminated throughout the whole world a knowledge of and taste for Aryan philosophy. The reflex action of this work is seen in the popular demand for theosophical literature, and novels, and magazine tales embodying Oriental ideas. Another important effect is the modification by Eastern philosophy of views of spiritualists, which has fairly begun, with respect to the source of some of the intelligence behind mediumistic phenomena. Still another is the adhesion of Mrs. Annie Besant brought about by the study of esoteric doctrine from the secularist party, an event fraught with most important consequences, both to our society, to secularism, and the general public. Sanskrit names never previously heard in the West have become familiar to the reading public, and works like the Bhagavad Gita are now found in the bookshops of Europe, America, and Australasia. Ceylon has seen a revival of Buddhism, the circulation of religious books by tens of thousands, the translation of the Buddhist catechism into many languages of the East, West, and North, the founding of theosophical high schools at Colombo, Kandy, and Ratnapura, the opening of nearly 50 schools for Buddhist children under the supervision of our society, the granting of a national Buddhist holiday by the government, and of other important privileges. The establishment of a vernacular semi-weekly Buddhist journal in Colombo, and one in English, both composed, primed and published from the Society's own printing office. And it has also seen us bring from Japan 7 clever young Buddhist priests to learn Pali under the venerated High Priest Sumangala, so as to be able to expound to their own countrymen the Buddhistic canon as it exists in the Southern Church 25 centuries after the nirvana of Buddha. Thus, it is not doubted that, within its first 14 years of existence, the Theosophical Society has succeeded to an extent beyond all expectation in realizing the first 2 of its 3 declared objects. It has proved that neither race, nor creed, neither color, nor old antipathies are irremovable obstacles to the spread of the idea of altruism and human brotherhood, utopian dream as it may have been considered by theorists who view man as a mere physical problem, ignoring the inner, greater, higher self. 3. Occultism. Though but a minority of our members are mystically inclined, yet, in point of fact, the key to our successes as above enumerated is in our recognition of the fact of the higher self, colorless, cosmopolitan, unsectarian, sexless, unworld, altruistic, and the doing of our work on that basis. To the secularist, the agnostic, the nihilistic scientist, such results would have been unattainable, nay, would have been unthinkable. Peace societies are utopian, because no amount of argument based upon exoteric considerations of social morals or expediency, can turn the hearts of the rulers of nations away from selfish war and schemes of conquest. Social differentiations, the result of physical evolutions and material environment, breed race hatreds and sectarian and social antipathies that are insurmountable if attacked from the outside. But, since human nature is ever identical, all men are alike open to influences which center upon the human heart, and appeal to the human intuition, and as there is but one absolute truth, and this is the soul and life of all human creeds, it is possible to effect a reciprocal alliance for the research of and dissemination of that basic truth. We know that a comprehensive term for that eternal verity is the secret doctrine. We have preached it, have won a hearing, have, to some extent, swept away the old barriers, formed our fraternal nucleus, and, by reviving Theorian literature, caused its precious religious, philosophical and scientific teachings to spread among the most distant nations. If we haven't opened regular adeptship in the society, we have at least brought forward a certain body of proof that adepts exist and that adeptship is a logical necessity in the natural order of human development. We have thus helped the West to a worthier ideal of man's potentialities than it before possessed. The study of Eastern psychology has given the West a clue to certain mysteries previously baffling, as, for example, in the department of mesmerism and hypnotism, and in that of the supposed posthumous relations of the disincarnate entity with the living. It has also furnished a theory of the nature and relations of force and matter capable of practical verification by whomsoever may learn and follow out the experimental methods of the oriental schools of occult science. Our own experience leads us to say that this science and its complementary philosophy throw light upon some of the deepest problems of man and nature, in science, bridging the impassable chasm, in philosophy, making it possible to formulate a consistent theory of the origin and destiny of the heavenly orbs and their progeny of kingdoms and various planes. Where Mr. Crookes stops in his quest after the meta-elements, and finds himself at a loss to trace the missing atoms in his hypothetical series of 7, Advaita philosophy steps in with its perfected theory of evolution of differentiated out of undifferentiated matter. Prakriti out of Malaprakriti, the rootless root. With the present publication of the Key to Theosophy, a new work that explains clearly and in plain language what our esoteric theosophy believes in and what it disbelieves and positively rejects, there will remain no more pretexts for flinging at our heads fantastic accusations. Now the correspondents of spiritualistic and other weeklies, as well as those who afflict respectable daily papers with denunciations of the alleged dogmas of the Theosophists that never had any existence outside our traducers' heads, will have to prove what they father upon us, by showing chapter and verse for it in our theosophical publications, and especially in the Key to Theosophy. They can plead ignorance no longer, and if they would still denounce, they must do so on the authority of what is stated therein, as every one has now an easy opportunity offered him of learning our philosophy. To close, our society has done more within its 14 years of life to familiarize Western thinkers with great Aryan thought and discovery than any other agency within the past 19 centuries. What it is likely to do in the future cannot be forecast, but experience warrants the hope that it may be very much, and that it will enlarge its already wide field of useful activity. Philosophers and philosophicules, we shall in vain interpret their words by the notions of our philosophy and the doctrines in our schools. Locke knowledge of the lowest kind is ununified knowledge, science is partially unified knowledge, philosophy is completely unified knowledge. Herbert Spencer, First Principles. New accusations are brought by captious censors against our society in general and Theosophy, especially. We will summarize them as we proceed along, and notice the freshest denunciation. We are accused of being illogical in the constitution and rules of the Theosophical Society, and contradictory in the practical application thereof. The accusations are framed in this wise: in the published constitution and rules great stress is laid upon the absolutely non-sectarian character of the society. It is constantly insisted upon that it has no creed, no philosophy, no religion, no dogmas, and even no special views of its own to advocate, still less to impose on its members. And yet why, bless us, is it not as undeniable a fact that certain very definite views of a philosophic and, strictly speaking, of a religious character are held by the founders, and most prominent members of the society? Verily so, we answer. But where is the alleged contradiction in this? Neither the founders, nor the most prominent members, nor yet the majority thereof, constitute the society, but only a certain portion of it, which, moreover, having no creed as a body, yet allows its members to believe as and what they please. In answer to this, we are told, very true, yet these doctrines are collectively called Theosophy. What is your explanation of this? We reply, to call them so is a collective mistake, one of those loose applications of terms to things that ought to be more carefully defined, and the neglect of members to do so is now bearing its fruits. In fact, it is an oversight as harmful as that which followed. The confusion of the two terms Buddhism and Bodhism, leading the wisdom philosophy to be mistaken for the religion of Buddha. But it is still urged that when these doctrines are examined it becomes very clear that all the work which the society as a body has done in the East and the West depended upon them. This is obviously true in the case of the doctrine of the underlying unity of all religions and the existence, as claimed by Theosophists, of a common source called the wisdom religion of the secret teaching. From which, according to the same claims, all existing forms of religion are directly or indirectly derived. Admitting this, we are pressed to explain, how can the TS as a body be said to have no special views or doctrines to inculcate, no creed and no dogmas, when these are the backbone of the society, its very heart and soul? To this we can only answer that it is still another error. That these teachings are most undeniably the backbone of the Theosophical societies in the He.S.L. but natal in the East, where such branch societies number almost 5 to 1 in the West, were these special doctrines the heart and soul of the whole body, then the Theosophy and its TS would have died out in India and Ceylon since 1885, and this is surely not the case. For, not only have they been virtually abandoned at Adyar since that year, as there was no one to teach them, but while some Brahmin Theosophists were very much opposed to that teaching being made public, others Themery Orthodox positively opposed them as being inimical to their exoteric systems. These are self-evident facts. And yet if answered Thetides not so, that the TS as a body teaches no special religion but tolerates and virtually accepts all religions by never interfering with, or even inquiring after the religious views of its members, archivillers, and even friendly opponents, do not feel satisfied. On the contrary, 10 to 1 they will nonplus you with the following extraordinary objection: how can this be, since belief in esoteric Buddhism is a sine qua non for acceptance as a fellow of your society? It is vain to protest any longer, useless, to assure our UPM and TS that belief in Buddhism, whether esoteric or exoteric, is no more expected by, nor obligatory in, our society than reverence for the monkey godden on him of the singed tail, or belief in Muhammad and his canonized mare. It is unprofitable to try and explain that since there are in the TS as many Brahmins, Musulmans, Parsis, Jews and Christians as there are Buddhists, and more, all cannot be expected to become followers of Buddha, nor even of Buddhism, howsoever esoteric. Nor can they be made to realize a thought the cult doctrines, a few fundamental teachings of which are broadly outlined in Mr. Sinnott's Esoteric Buddhism are not the whole of Theosophy, nor even the whole of the secret doctrines of the East, but a very small portion of these, occultism itself being but one of the sciences of Theosophy, or the wisdom religion, and by no means the whole of Theosophy. So firmly rooted seem these ideas, however, in the mind of the average Britisher, that it is like telling him that there are Russians who are neither nihilists nor panslavists, and that every Frenchman does not make his daily meal of frogs. He will simply refuse to believe you. Prejudice against Theosophy seems to have become part of the national feeling. For almost 3 years the writer of the present, helped in this by a host of Theosophists, has tried in vain to sweep away from the public brain some of the most fantastic cobwebs with which it is garnished, and now she is on the eve of giving up the attempt in despair. While half of the English people will persist in confusing Theosophy with esoteric 6wr//.rw, the remainder will keep on pronouncing the world-honored title of Buddha as they do butter. It is they also who have started the proposition now generally adopted by the flippant press that Theosophy is not a philosophy, but a religion, and a new section. Theosophy is certainly not a philosophy, simply because it includes every philosophy as every science and religion. But before we prove it once more, it may be pertinent to ask how many of our critics are thoroughly posted about, say, even the true definition of the term coined by Pythagoras, that they should so flippantly deny it to a system of which they seem to know still less than they do. About philosophy? Have they acquainted themselves with its best and latest definitions, or even with the views upon it, now regarded as antiquated, of Sir W. Hamilton? The answer would seem to be in the negative, since they fail to see that every such definition shows Theosophy to be the very synthesis of philosophy in its widest abstract sense, as in its special qualifications. Let us try to give once more a clear and concise definition of Theosophy, and show it to be the very root and essence of all sciences and systems. Theosophy is divine or God wisdom. Therefore, it must be the lifeblood of that system, philosophy, which is defined as the science of things divine and human and the causes in which they are contained. Sir W. Hamilton, Theosophy alone possessing the keys to those causes. Bearing in mind simply its most elementary division, we find that philosophy is the love of, and search after wisdom, the knowledge of phenomena as explained by, and resolved into, causes and reasons, powers and laws. Encyclopedia. When applied to God or gods, it became in every country theology. When to material nature, it was called physics and natural history. Concerned with man, it appeared as anthropology and psychology, and when raised to the higher regions it becomes known as metaphysics. Such is philosophy, the scientiophysics by their causes, the very spirit of the doctrine of karma, i.e. most important teaching under various names of every religious philosophy, and a theosophical tenet that belongs to no one religion but explains them all. Philosophy is also called the science of things possible, inasmuch as they are possible. This applies directly to theosophical doctrines, inasmuch as they reject miracle, but it can hardly apply to theology or any dogmatic religion, every one of which enforces belief in things impossible, nor to the modern philosophical systems of the materialists who reject even the possible, whenever the latter contradicts their assertions. Theosophy claims to explain and to reconcile religion with science. We find G. H. Lewis, History of Philosophy, Vol. I, Prolegomena, p. 18. Stating that philosophy, detaching its widest conceptions from both theology and science, furnishes a doctrine which contains an explanation of the world and human destiny. The office of philosophy is the systematization of the conceptions furnished by science. Science furnishes the knowledge, and philosophy the doctrine, LOCCIT. The latter can become complete only on condition of having that knowledge and that doctrine pass through the sieve of divine wisdom, or theosophy. Uberweg, History of Philosophy, defines philosophy as the science of principles, which, as all our members know, is the claim of theosophy in its branch sciences of alchemy, astrology, and the occult sciences generally. Hegel regards it as the contemplation of the self-development of the absolute, or in other words as the representation of the idea, Darstellion Derrida. The whole of the secret doctrine of which the work bearing that name is but an atom is such a contemplation and record, as far as finite language and limited thought can record the process of the infinite. Thus it becomes evident that Theosophy cannot be a religion, still less a sect, but it is indeed the quintessence of the highest philosophy in all and every one of its aspects, having shown that it falls under, and answers fully, every description of philosophy. We may add to the above a few more of Sir W. Hamilton's definitions, and prove our statement by showing the pursuit of Theosophy in theosophical literature. This is a task easy enough, indeed. For, does not Theosophy include the science of things evidently deduced from first principles, as well as the science of truth sensible and abstract? Does it not preach the applications of reason to its legitimate objects, and make it one of its legitimate objects to inquire into the science of the original form of the ego, or mental self, as also to teach the secret of the absolute indifference oft ideal and real? All of which proves that according to every definition old or new of philosophy, he who studies Theosophy studies the highest transcendental philosophy. We need not go out of our way to notice at any length such foolish statements about Theosophy and Theosophists as are found almost daily in the public press. Such definitions and epithets as newfangled religion and ism, the system invented by the high priestess of Theosophy, and other remarks as silly, may be left to their own fate. They have been and in most cases will be left unnoticed. Our age is regarded as being preeminently critical, an age which analyses closely, and whose public refuses to accept anything offered for its consideration before others fully scrutinize its subject. Such is the boast of our century, but such is not quite the opinion of the impartial observer. At all events it is an opinion highly exaggerated, since this boasted analytical scrutiny is applied only to that which interferes in no way with national, social, or personal prejudices. On the other hand, everything that is malevolent, destructive to reputation, wicked and slanderous I received with open embrace, accepted joyfully, and made the subject of everlasting public gossip, without any scrutiny or the slightest hesitation, but verily on a blind faith of the most elastic kind. We challenge contradiction on this point. Neither unpopular characters nor their work are judged in our day on their intrinsic value, but merely on their author's personality and the prejudiced opinion thereon oft. Masses. In many journals no literary work of a theosophist can ever hope to be reviewed on its own merits, apart from the gossip about its author. Such papers, oblivious of the rule first laid down by Aristotle, who says that criticism is a standard of judging well, refuse point blank to accept any theosophical book apart from its writer as a first result. The former is judged by the distorted reflection of the latter created by slander repeated in the daily papers. The personality of the writer hangs like a dark shadow between the opinion of the modern journalist and unvarnished truth, and as a final result there are few editors in all European America who know anything of our society's tenets. How can then Theosophy or even the TS be correctly judged? It is nothing new to say that the true critic ought to know something at least of the subject he undertakes to analyze. Nor is it very risky to add that no tonafu or prestherscites knows in the remotest way what he is talking about this, from the large fish to the smallest fry, but whenever the word Theosophy is printed and catches the reader's eye, there it will be generally found preceded and followed by abusive epithets and invective against the personalities of certain Theosophists. The modern editor of the grundy pandering kind, is like Byron's hero, he knew not what to say, and so he swore at that which passeth his comprehension. All such swearing is invariably based upon old gossip, and stale denunciations of those who stand in the moonstruck minds as the inventors of Theosophy. Had South Sea Icelanders a daily press of their own, they would be as sure to accuse the missionaries of having invented Christianity in order to bring to grief their native fetishism. How long, O radiant gods of truth, how long shall this terrible mental cessity of the 19th century philosophists last? How much longer are they to be told that Theosophy is non-national property, no religion, but only the universal code of science and the most transcendental ethics that was ever known, that it lies at the root of every moral philosophy and religion, and that neither Theosophy per se, nor yet its humble unworthy vehicle. The Theosophical Society, has anything whatever to do with any personality or personalities. To identify it with these is to show oneself sadly defective in logic and even common sense, to reject the teaching and its asterisk from Jupiter Tonans of the Saturday Review down to the scurrilous editors of the Mirror. The first may be as claimed one of the greatest authorities living on fencing, and the other as great at muscular thought reading, yet both are equally ignorant of Theosophy and as the blind to its real object and purposes as two owls are to daylight. Philosophy, under the pretext that its leaders, or rather one of its founders, lies under various accusations, so far unproven, is silly, illogical, and absurd. It is, in truth, as ridiculous as it would have been in Theosoph, the Alexandrian school of Neoplatonism, which was in its essence Theosophy, to reject its teachings, because it came to Plato from Socrates, and because the sage of Athens, besides his pugnosy and bald head, was accused of blasphemy and of corrupting the youth. Kind and generous critics, who call yourselves Christians, and boast of the civilization and progress of your age, you have only to be scratched skin deep to find in you the same cruel and prejudiced barbarian as of old, when an opportunity offered you to sit in public and legal judgment on a Theosophist. Who of you would rise in your 19th century of Christianity higher than one of the Athenian dicastery with its 500 jurors who condemned Socrates to death? Which of you would scorn to become a Meletus or an Anytus? And have Theosophy and all its adherents condemned on the evidence of false witness to a like ignominious death? The hatred manifested in your daily attacks upon the Theosophists is a warrant to us for this. Did Heywood have you in his mind's eye when he wrote of society's censure? Oh, that the too censorious world would learn this wholesome rule, and with each other bear, but man, as if a foe to his own species, takes pleasure to report his neighbor's faults, judging with rigor every small offense, and prides himself in scandal. Many optimistic writers would fain make of this mercantile century of ours an age of philosophy and call it its Renaissance. We fail to find outside of our society any attempt at philosophical revival, unless the word philosophy is made to lose its original meaning. For wherever we turn we find a cold sneer at true philosophy. A skeptic can never aspire to that title. He who is capable of imagining the universe with its handmaiden nature fortuitous and hatched like the black hen of the fable, out of a self-created egg hanging in space, has neither the power of thinking nor the spiritual faculty of perceiving abstract truths, which power and faculty are the first requisites of a philosophical mind. We see the entire realm of modern science honeycombed with such materialists, who yet claim to be regarded as philosophers. They either believe not as do the secularists, or doubt according to the manner of the agnostics. Remembering Thetois' aphorisms by Bacon, the modern-day materialist is thus condemned out of the mouth of the founder of his own inductive method, as contrasted with the deductive philosophy of Plato, accepted in Theosophy. For does not Bacon tell us that philosophy when superficially studied excites doubt, when thoroughly explored it dispels it, and again, a//rr/f philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth of philosophy bringeth man's mind about to religion? The logical deduction of the above is, undeniably, that none of our present Darwinians and materialists and their admirers, our critics, could have studied philosophy otherwise than very superficially. Hence, while Theosophists have a legitimate right to the title of philosophers, true lovers of wisdom, their critics and slanderers are at best philosophicules, the progeny of modern philosoph 1sm. The tidal wave of deeper souls into our inmost being rolls, and lifts us unawares, out of all meaner cares. Longfellow. The great psychic and spiritual change now taking place in the realm of the human soul, is quite remarkable. It began towards the very commencement of the now slowly vanishing last quarter of our century, and will end, so says a mystic prophet, either for the will or the woe of civilized humanity, with the present cycle, which will close in 1897. But the great change is not effected in solemn silence, nor is it perceived only by the few. On the contrary, it asserts itself amid a loud din of busy, boisterous tongues, a clash of public opinion, in comparison to which the incessant, ever-increasing roar even of the noisiest political agitation seems like the rustling oft young forest foliage, on a warm spring day. Verily the spirit in man, so long hidden out of public sight, so carefully concealed and so far exiled from the arena of modern learning, has at last awakened. It now asserts itself and is loudly redemanding its unrecognized yet ever legitimate IGHTS.LT refuses to be any longer trampled under the brutal foot of materialism, speculated upon by the churches, and made a fathomless source of income by those who have self-constituted themselves its universal custodians. The former would deny the divine presence any right to existence, the latter would accentuate and prove it through their sidesmen and church wardens armed with money bags and collection boxes. But the spirit in man, the direct, though no but broken ray and emanation of the universal spirit, has at last awakened. Hitherto, while so often reviled, persecuted and abased through ignorance, ambition and greed, while so frequently turned by insane pride into a blind wanderer, like unto a buffoon mocked by a host of buffoons, in the realm of delusion, it remained unheard and unheeded. Today, the spirit in man has returned like King Lear. From seeming insanity to its senses, and, raising its voice, it now speaks in those authoritative tones to which the men of old have listened in reverential silence through incalculable ages, until deafened by the din and roar of civilization and culture, they could hear it no longer. Look around you and behold. Think of what you see and hear, and draw therefrom your conclusions. The age of crass materialism, of soul insanity and blindness is swiftly passing away. A death struggle between mysticism and materialism is no longer at hand, but is already raging. And the party which will win the day at this supreme hour will become the master of the situation and of the future, i.e., it will become the autocrat and sole disposer of the millions of men already born and to be born, up to the latter end of the XXth century. If the signs of the times can be trusted, it is not the animalists who will remain conquerors. This is warranted us by the many brave and prolific authors and writers who have arisen of late to defend the rights of spirit to reign over matter. Many are the honest, aspiring souls now raising themselves like a dead wall against the torrent of the muddy waters of materialism and facing hither a mineering flood which is still steadily carrying off into unknown abysses the fragments from the wreck of the dethroned, cast down human spirit. They now command, so far hast thou come, but thou shalt go no further. Amid all this external discord and disorganization of social harmony, amid confusion and the weak and cowardly hesitations oft he masses, tied down to the narrow frames of routine, propriety and cant, amid that late dead calm of public thought that had exiled from literature every reference to soul and spirit and their divine working during the whole of the middle period of our century, we hear a sound arising like a clear, definite, far-reaching note of promise. The voice of the great human soul proclaims, in no longer timid tones, the rise and almost the resurrection of the human spirit. In the masses it is now awakening in the foremost representatives of thought and learning, it speaks in the lowest and highest, and stimulates them all to action. The renovated, life-giving spirit in man is boldly freeing itself from the dark fetters of the hitherto all-capturing animal life and matter. Behold it, saith the poet, as, ascending on its broad, white wings, it soars into the regions of real life and light, whence, calm and godlike, it contemplates with unfeigned pity those golden idols of the modern materialism with their feet of clay, which have hitherto screened from the purblind masses their true and living gods. Literature once wrote, a critic is the confession of social life, reflecting all its sins, and all its acts of baseness as of heroism. In this sense a book is of a far greater importance than any man. Books do not represent one man, but they are the mirror of a host of men. Hence the great English poet-philosopher said of books, that he knew that they were as hard to kill and as prolific as the teeth of the fabulous dragon, sow them hither and thither and armed warriors will grow out of them. To kill a good book, is equal to killing a man. The poet-philosopher is right. A new era has begun in literature, this is certain. New thoughts and new interests have created new intellectual needs, hence a new race of authors is springing up. And this new species will gradually and imperceptibly shut out the old one, those fogies of yore who, though they still reign nominally, are allowed to do so rather by force of habit than predilection. It is not he who repeats obstinately and parrot-like the old literary formulae and holds desperately to publishers' traditions, who will find himself answering to the new needs, not the man who prefers his narrow party discipline to the search for the long exiled spirit of man and the now lost truths, not these, but verily he who, parting company with his beloved authority, lifts boldly and carries an unflinchingly the standard off the future man. It is finally those who, amidst the present wholesale dominion of the worship of matter, material interests, and selfishness, will have bravely fought for human rights and man's divine nature, who will become, if they only, win the teachers of the masses in the coming century, and so their benefactors. But woe it othix century if now a reigning school of thought prevails, for spirit would once more be made captive and silenced till the end of the now coming age. It is not the fanatics of the dead letter in general, nor the iconoclasts and vandals who fight the new spirit of thought, nor yet the modern roundheads, supporters of the old Puritan religious and social traditions, who will ever become the protectors and saviors of the now resurrecting human thought and spirit. It is not these two willing supporters of old cult, and the medieval heresies of those who guard like a relic every error of their sect or party, who jealously watch over their own thought lest it should, growing out of its teens, assimilate some fresher and more beneficent idea, not these who are the wise men of the future. It is not for them that the hour of the new historical era will have struck, but for those who will have learned to express and put into practice the aspirations as well as the physical needs of the rising generations and of the now trampled down masses. In order that one should fully comprehend individual life with its physiological, psychic, and spiritual mysteries, he has to devote himself with all the fervor of unselfish philanthropy and love for his brother men, to studying and knowing collective life, or mankind. Without preconceptions or prejudice, as also without the least fear of possible results in one or another direction, he has to decipher, understand, and remember the deep and innermost feelings and the aspirations of the poor people's great and suffering heart. To do this he has first to attune his soul with that of humanity, as the old philosophy teaches, to thoroughly master the correct meaning of every line and word in the rapidly turning pages of the book of life of mankind, and to be thoroughly saturated with the truism that the latter is a whole inseparable from his own self. How many of such profound readers of life may be found in our boasted age of sciences and culture? Of course we do not mean authors alone, but rather practicalans still unrecognized, though well known, philanthropists and altruists of our age, the people's friends, the unselfish lovers of man, and the defenders of human right to the freedom of spirit. Few indeed are such, for they are the rare blossoms of the age, and generally the martyrs to prejudiced mobs and time-servers like those wonderful snow-flowers of northern Siberia, which, in order to shoot forth from the cold frozen soil, have to pierce through a thick layer of hard, icy snow. So these rare characters have to fight their battles all their life with cold indifference and human harshness, and with the selfish ever-mocking world of wealth. Yet, it is only they who can carry out the task of perseverance. To them alone is given the mission of turning the upper ten of social circles from the broad and easy highway of wealth, vanity, and empty pleasures into the arduous and thorny path of higher moral problems, and the perception of loftier moral beauties than they are now pursuing. It is also those who, already themselves awakened to a higher soul activity, are being endowed at the same time with literary talent, whose duty it is to undertake the part of awakening the sleeping beauty and the beast, in their enchanted castle of frivolity, to real life and light. Let all those who can, proceed fearlessly with this idea uppermost in their mind, and they will succeed. It is the rich who have to be regenerated, if we would do good to the poor, for it is in the former that lies the root of evil, of which the disinherited class share but the too luxuriant growth. This may seem at first sight paradoxical, yet it is true, as may be shown. In the face of the present degradation of every ideal, as also of the noblest aspirations of the human heart, becoming each day more prominent in the higher classes. What can be expected from the great unwashed? It is the head that has to guide the feet, and the latter are to be hardly held responsible for their actions. Work, therefore, to bring about the moral regeneration of the cultured but far more immoral classes before you attempt to do the same for our ignorant younger brethren. The latter was undertaken years ago, and is carried on to this day, yet with no perceptible good results. Is it not evident that the reason for this lies in the fact that except for a few earnest, sincere and all-sacrificing workers in that field, the great majority of the volunteers consists of those same frivolous, selfish classes, who play at charity and whose idesoft amelioration of the physical and moral status of the poor are confined to the hobby that money and the Bible alone can do it. We say that neither of these can accomplish any good, for dead letter preaching and forced Bible reading develop irritation and later atheism, and money as a temporary help finds its way into the tills of the public houses rather than serves to buy bread with. The root of evil lies, therefore, in a moral, not in a physical cause. If asked, what is it then that will help, we answer boldly, theosophical literature, hastening to add that under this term, neither books concerning adepts and phenomena, nor the Theosophical Society publications are meant. Take advantage of, and profit by, the tidal wave which is now happily overpowering half of humanity. Speak to the awakening spirit of humanity, to the human spirit and the spirit in man, these three in one and the one in all. Dickens and Thackeray, both born a century too late or a century too early, came between two tidal waves of human spiritual thought, and though they have done yeoman service individually and induced certain partial reforms, yet they failed to touch society and the masses at large. What the European world now needs is a dozen writers such as Dostoevsky, the Russian author, whose works, though terra incognita for most, are still well known on the continent, as also in England and ICA among the cultured classes. And what the Russian novelist has done is this: he spoke boldly and fearlessly the most unwelcome truths to the higher and even to the official classes, the latter a far more dangerous proceeding than the former. And yet behold, most of the administrative reforms during the last 20 years are due to the silent and unwelcome influence of his pen. As Onavius critics remarks, the great truths uttered by him were felt by all classes so vividly and so strongly that people whose views were most diametrically opposed to his own could not but feel the warmest sympathy for this bold writer, and even expressed it to him. In the eyes of all, friends or foes, he became the mouthpiece of the irrepressible, no longer to be delayed need felt by society, to look with absolute sincerity into the innermost depths of its own soul, to become the impartial judge of its own actions and its own aspirations. Every new current of thought, every new tendency of the age had and ever will have its rivals, as its enemies, some counteracting it boldly but unsuccessfully, others with great ability. But such are always made of the same paste, so to say, common to all. They are goaded to resistance and objections by the same external, selfish, and worldly objects, the same material ends and calculations as those that guided their opponents. While pointing out other problems and advocating other methods, in truth, they cease not for one moment to live with their foes in a world of the same and common interests, as also to continue in the same fundamental identical views on life. That which then became necessary was a man, who, standing outside of any partisanship or struggle for supremacy, would bring his past life as a guarantee of the sincerity and honesty of his views and purposes, one whose personal suffering would be an imprimatur to the firmness of his convictions, a writer finally of undeniable literary genius, for such a man alone could pronounce words capable of awakening the true spirit in a society which had drifted away in a wrong direction. Just such a man was Dostoevsky, the patriot convict, the galley slave, returned from Siberia, that writer, far famed in Europe and Russia, the pauper buried by voluntary subscription, the soul-stirring bard, of everything poor, insulted, injured, humiliated, he who unveiled with such merciless cruelty the plagues and sores of his age. It is writers of this kind that are needed in our day of reawakening, not authors written for wealth or fame, but fearless apostles of the living word of truth, moral healer soft postulasaurs of our century. France has her Zola, who points out, brutally enough, yet still true to life, the degradation and moral leprosy of his people. But Zola, while castigating the vices of the lower classes, has never dared to lash higher with his pen than the petite bourgeoisie, the immorality of the higher classes being ignored by him. Result, the peasants who do not read novels have not been in the least affected by his writings, and the bourgeoisie, caring little for H.P.Bs, took such notice of Potbull as to make the French realist lose all desire of burning his fingers again at their family pots. From the first then, Zola has pursued a path which, though bringing him to fame and fortune, has led him nowhere in so far as salutary effects are concerned. Whether Theosophists, in the present or future, will ever work out a practical application of the suggestion is doubtful. To write novels with a moral sense in them deep enough to stir society, requires a great literary talent and a born Theosophist, as was Dostoevsky. Zola standing outside of any comparison with him. But such talents are rare in all countries. Yet, even in the absence of such great gifts, one may do good in a smaller and humbler way by taking note and exposing in impersonal narratives the crying vices and evils of the day, by word and deed, by publications and practical example. Let the force of that example impress others to follow it, and then, instead of deriding our doctrines and aspirations, the men of the XXTH, if not the XIXTH century, will see clearer, and judge with knowledge and according to facts instead of prejudging agreeably to rooted misconceptions. Then and not till then will the world find itself forced to acknowledge that it was wrong, and that Theosophy alone can gradually create a mankind as harmonious and as simple-souled as cosmos itself, but to effect this Theosophists have to act as such. Having helped to awaken the spirit in many a man, we say this boldly, challenging contradiction: shall we now stop instead of swimming with the tidal wave? Theosophist, January, 1922. Why I do not return to India. To my brothers of Aryavarta, in April, 1890, 5 years elapsed since I left India. Great kindness has been shown to me by many of my Hindu brethren at various times since I left, especially this year, 1890, when, ill almost to death, I have received from several Indian branches letters of sympathy, and assurances that they had not forgotten her, to whom India and the Hindus have been most of her life far dearer than her own country. It is, therefore, my duty to explain why I do not return to India, and my attitude with regard to the new leaf turned in the history of the T.S. by my being formally placed at the head of the Theosophical movement in Europe. For it is not solely on account of bad health that I do not return to India. Those who have saved me from death at Adyar, and twice since then, could easily keep me alive there as they do me here. There is a far more serious reason. A line of conduct has been traced for me here, and I have found among the English and American what I have so far vainly sought for in India. In Europe and America, during the last 3 years, I have met with hundreds of men and women who have the courage to avow their conviction of the real existence of the masters, and who are working for Theosophy on their lines and under their guidance, given through my humble self. In India, on the other hand, ever since my departure, the true spirit of devotion to the masters and the courage to avow it has steadily dwindled away. At Adyar itself, increasing strife and conflict has raged between personalities, uncalled for and utterly undeserved animosity, almost hatred, has been shown towards me by several members of the staff. There seems to have been something strange and uncanny going on at Adyar, during these last years. No sooner does a European, most theosophically inclined, most devoted to the cause, and the person a friend of Mijolf or the President, set his foot in headquarters, than he becomes forthwith a personal enemy to one or other of us, and what is worse, ends by injuring and deserting the cause. Let it be understood at once that I accuse no one. Knowing what I do of the activity of the force of Kali Yuga at work to impede and ruin the Theosophical movement, I do not regard those who have become, one after the other, my enemies, and that without any fault of my own, as I might regard them, were it otherwise. One of the chief factors in the reawakening of Aryavarta, which has been part of the work of the Theosophical Society, was the ideal of the masters. But owing to want of judgment, discretion, and discrimination, and the liberties taken with their names and personalities, great misconception arose concerning them. I was under the most solemn oath and pledge never to reveal the whole truth to anyone, excepting to those who, like Damodar, had been finally selected and called by them. All that I was then permitted to reveal was, that there existed somewhere such great men, that some of them were Hindus, that they were learned as none others in all the ancient wisdom of Gupta Vidya, and had acquired all the cities, not as these are represented in tradition and the blinds of ancient writings, but as they are in fact and nature, and also that I was Akila of one of them. However, in the fancy of some Hindus, the most wild and ridiculous fancy soon grew up concerning them. They were referred to as Mahatmas, and still some too enthusiastic friends belittled them with their strange fancy pictures. Our opponents, describing Mahatma as a full Jivanmutta, urged that, as such, he was debarred from holding any communication whatsoever with persons living in the world. They also maintained that as this is the Kali Yuga, it was impossible that there could be any Mahatmas at all in our age. These early misconceptions, notwithstanding the idea of masters and belief in them, has already brought its good fruit in India. Their chief desire was to preserve the truer religious and philosophical spirit of ancient India, to defend the ancient wisdom contained in its Darshanas and Upanishads against the systematic assaults of the missionaries, and finally to reawaken the dormant ethical and patriotic spirit in those youths in whom it had almost disappeared owing to college education. Much of this has been achieved by and through the Theosophical Society, in spite of all its mistakes and imperfections. Had it not been for Theosophy, would India have had her Tukaram Tatya doing now the priceless work he does, and which no one in India ever thought of doing before him? Without the Theosophical Society, would India have ever thought of wrenching from the hands of learned but unspiritual Orientalists the duty of reviving, translating, and editing the sacred books of the East, of popularizing and selling them at a far cheaper rate, and at the same time in a far more correct form than had ever been done at Oxford? Would our respected and devoted brother Tukaram Tatya himself have ever thought of doing so, had he not joined the Theosophical Society? Would your political congress itself have even been a possibility, without the Theosophical Society? Most important of all, one at least among you has fully benefited by it, and if the Society had never given to India but that one future adept, Damodar, who has now the prospect of becoming one day a Mahatma. Kali Yuga notwithstanding, that alone would be proof that it was not founded at New York and transplanted to India in vain. Finally, if any one among the 300 millions of India can demonstrate, proof in hand, that Theosophy, the TS, or even my humble self, have been the means of doing the slightest harm, either to the country or any Hindu, that the founders have been guilty of teaching pernicious doctrines, or offering bad advice then and then only, can it be imputed to me as a crime that I have brought forward the ideal of the masters and founded the Theosophical Society. I, my good and never to be forgotten Hindu brothers, the name alone of the holy masters, which was at one time invoked with prayers for their blessings, from one end of India to the other, their name alone has wrought a mighty change for the better in your land. It is not to Colonel Alcott or to myself that you owe anything, but verily to these names, which, but a few years ago, had become a household word in your mouths. Thus it was that, so long as I remained at Adyar, things went on smoothly enough, because one or other of the masters was almost constantly present among us, and their spirit ever protected the Theosophical Society from real harm. But in 1884, Colonel Alcott and myself left for a visit to Europe, and while we were away the Padre Kulam thunderbolt descended. I returned in November, and was taken most dangerously ill. It was during that time and Colonel Alcott's absence in Burma, that the seeds of all future strifes, and let me say at once disintegration of the Theosophical Society, were planted by our enemies, what with the Patterson-Kulam-Hodgson conspiracy, and the faint-heartedness of the chief Theosophists. That society did not then and there collapse should be sufficient proof of how it was protected. Shaken in their belief, the faint-hearted began to ask, why, if the masters are genuine Mahatmas, have they allowed such things to take place, or why have they not used their powers to destroy this plot or that conspiracy, or even this or that man and woman? Yet it had been explained numberless times that no adept of the right path will interfere with the just workings of karma. Not even the greatest of yogis can divert the progress of karma, or arrest the natural results of actions for more than a short period, and even in that case, these results will only reassert themselves later with event-unfold force, for such is the occult law of karma and the nidanas. Nor again will even the greatest of phenomena aid real spiritual progress. We have each of us to win our moksha or nirvana by our own merit, not because a guru or deva will help to conceal our shortcomings. There is no merit in having been created an immaculate deva or in being God, but there is the eternal bliss of moksha looming forth for the man who becomes as a god and deity by his own personal exertions. It is the mission of karma to punish the guilty and not the duty of any master. But those who act up to their teaching and live the life of which they are the best exemplars, will never be abandoned by them, and will always find their beneficent help whenever needed, whether obviously or invisibly. This is of course addressed to those who have not yet quite lost their faith in masters. Those who have never believed, or have ceased to believe in them, are welcome to their own opinions. No one except themselves perhaps will be Theosophist thereby. As for myself, who can charge me with having acted like an impostor? With having, for instance, taken one single pi asterisk from any living soul? With having ever asked for money, or with having accepted it, notwithstanding that I was repeatedly offered large sums? Those who, in spite of this, have chosen to think otherwise, will have to explain what even my traducers of Thepadry class and Psychical Research Society have been unable to explain to this day, viz., the motive for such fraud. They will have to explain why, instead of taking and making money, I gave away to the society every penny I earned be written for the papers, why at the same time I nearly killed myself with overwork and incessant labor year after year, until my health gave way, so that but for my master's repeat help, I should have died long ago from the effects of such voluntary hard labor. *p/e, i.e., penny a pi is the smallest Anglo-Indian coin. eds. For the absurd Russian spy theory, if it still finds credit in some idiotic heads, has long ago disappeared, at any rate from the official brains of the Anglo-Indians. If, I say, at that critical moment, the members of the society, and especially its leaders at Adyar, Hindu and European, had stood together as one man, firm in their conviction of the reality and power of masters, Theosophy would have come out more triumphantly than ever, and none of their fears would have ever been realized, however cunning the legal traps set for me, and whatever mistakes and errors of judgment I, their humble representative, might have made in the executive conduct of the matter. But the loyalty and courage of Adyar authorities, and of the few Europeans who had trusted in the masters, were not equal to the trial when it came. In spite of my protests, I was hurried away from headquarters. Ill as I was, almost dying in truth, as the physicians said. Yet I protested, and would have battled for Theosophy in India to my last breath, had I found loyal support, but some feared legal entanglements, some the government, while my best friends believed in the doctor's threats that I must die if I remained in India. So I was sent to Europe to regain my strength, with a promise of speedy return to my beloved Aryavarta. Well, I left, and immediately intrigues and rumors began. Even at Naples already, I learnt that I was reported to be meditating to start in Europe a rival society and burst up Adyar. At this I laughed. Then it was rumored that I had been abandoned by the masters, been disloyal to them, done this or the other. None of it had the slightest truth or foundation in fact. Then I was accused of being, at best, a hallucinated medium, who had mistaken spooks for living masters, while others declared that the real H.P. Blavatsky was dead, had died through the injudicious use of Kundalini, and that the form had been forthwith seized upon by a Dugpakila, who was the present H.P.B. Some again held me to be a witch, a sorceress, who for purposes of her own played the part of a philanthropist and lover of India, while in reality bent upon the destruction of all those who had the misfortune to be psychologized by me. In fact, the powers of psychology attributed to me by my enemies, whenever a fact or a phenomenon could not be explained away, are so great that they alone would have made of me a most remarkable adept independently of any masters or Mahatmas. In short, up to 1886, when the SPR report was published and this soap bubble burst over our heads, it was one long series of false charges, every mail bringing something new. I will name no one, or does it matter who said a thing and who repeated it? One thing is certain, with the exception of Colonel Alcott, everyone seemed to banish the masters from their thoughts and their spirit from ADR. Every imaginable incongruity was connected with these holy names, and I alone was held responsible for every disagreeable event that took place. Every mistake made. In a letter received from Damodar in 1886, he notified me that the master's influence was becoming with every day weaker at ADR, that they were daily represented as less than second-rate yogis, totally denied by some, while even those who believed in, and had remained loyal to them, feared even to pronounce their names. Finally, he urged me very strongly to return, saying that of course the masters would see that my health should not suffer from it. I wrote to that effect to Colonel Alcott, imploring him to let me return, and promising that I would live at Pondicherry, if needed, should my presence not be desirable at ADR. To this I received the ridiculous answer that no sooner should I return, than I should be sent to the Andaman Islands as a Russian spy, which of course Colonel Alcott subsequently found out to be absolutely untrue. The readiness with which such a futile pretext for keeping me from ADR was seized upon, shows in clear colors the ingratitude of those to whom I had given my life and health. Nay more, urged on, as one understood, by the Executive Council, under the entirely absurd pretext that, in case of my death, my heirs might claim a share in the ADR property, the President sent me a legal paper to sign, by which I formally renounced any right to the headquarters or even Talavera without the Council's permission. This, although I had spent several thousand rupees of my own private money, and had devoted Miss Harriot the profits of the Theosophist to the purchase of the house and its furniture, nevertheless I signed the renunciation without one word of protest. I saw one was not wanted, and remained in Europe in spite of my ardent desire to return to India. How could I do otherwise than feel that all my labors had been rewarded with ingratitude, when my most urgent wishes to return were met with flimsy excuses and answers inspired by those who were hostile to me? The result of this is too apparent. You know too well the state of affairs in India for me to dwell longer upon details. In a word, since my departure, not only has the activity of the movement there gradually slackened, but those for whom I had the deepest affections, regarding Theosophist Heronsons, have turned against me. While in the West, no sooner had I accepted the invitation to come to London, than I found people the SPR report and wild suspicions and hypotheses rampant in every direction, notwithstanding to believe in the truth of the great cause I have struggled for, and in my own bona fides. Acting under the master's orders, I began a new movement in the West on the original lines. I founded Lucifer, and the lodge which bears my name. Recognizing the splendid work done at ADR by Colonel Alcott and others to carry out the second of the three objects of the TS, viz., to promote the study of Oriental literature, I was determined to carry out here Thetwo others. All know with what success this had been attended. Twice Colonel Alcott was asked to come over, and then I learned that I was once more wanted in India at any rate by some, but the invitation came too late, neither would my doctor permit it. Nor can I, if I would be true to my life pledge and vows, now live at the headquarters from which the masters and their spirit are virtually banished. The presence of their portraits will not help, they are a dead letter. The truth is that I can never return to India in any other capacity than as their faithful agent. And as, unless they appear among the council in propria persona, which they will certainly never do now, no advice of mine on occult lines seems likely to be accepted, as the fact of my relations with the masters is doubted, even totally denied by some. And one myself having no right to the headquarters, what reason is there, therefore, for me to live at Adyar? The fact is this: in my position, half measures are worse than none. People have either to believe entirely in me, or to honestly disbelieve. No theosophist is compelled to believe, but it is worse than useless for people to ask me to help them, if they do not believe in me. Here in Europe and America are many who have never flinched in their devotion to theosophy. Consequently, the spread of theosophy and of the TS, in the West, during the last 3 years, has been extraordinary. The chief reason for this is that I was enabled and encouraged by the devotion of an ever-increasing number of members to Theos and to those who guide it, to establish an esoteric section, in which I can teach something of what I have learned to those who have confidence in me, and who prove this confidence by their disinterested work for Theosophy and the TS. For the future, then, it is my intention to devote my life and energy to the .s and to the teaching of those whose confidence I retain. It is useless that I should use the little time I have before me to justify myself before those who do not feel sure about the real existence of the masters, only because, misunderstanding me, it therefore suits them to suspect me. And let me say at once, to avoid misconception, that my only reason for accepting the exoteric direction of European affairs, was to save those who really have Theosophy at heart and work for it and the society, from being hampered by those who not only do not care for Theosophy, as laid out by the masters, but are entirely working against both, endeavoring to undermine and counteract the influence of the good work done, both by open denial of the existence of the masters, by declared and bitter hostility to myself, and also by joining forces with the most desperate enemies of our society. Half measures, I repeat, are no longer possible. Either I have stated the truth as I know it about the masters, and teach what I have been taught by them, or I have invented both them and the esoteric philosophy. There are those among the esotericists of the inner group who say that if I have done the latter, then I must myself be a master. However it may be, there is no alternative to this dilemma. The only claim, therefore, which India could ever have upon me would be strong only in proportion to the activity of the fellows there for Theosophy and their loyalty to the masters. You should not need my presence among you to convince you of the truth of Theosophy, any more than your American brothers need it. A conviction that wanes when any particular personality is absent is no conviction at all. No, moreover, that any further proof and teaching I can give only to the esoteric section, and this following reason: its members are the only ones whom I have the right to expel for open disloyalty to their pledge, not to H.P.B, but to their higher self and the Mahatmic aspect of the masters, a privilege I cannot exercise with FTSS at large, yet one which is the only means of cutting off a diseased limb from the healthy body of the tree, and thus save it from infection. I can care only for those who cannot be swayed by every breath of calumny and every sneer, suspicion, or criticism, whoever it may emanate from. Thenceforth let it be clearly understood that the rest of my life is devoted only to those who believe in the masters, and are willing to work for Theosophy as they understand it, and for the TS on the lines upon which they originally established it. If, then, my Hindu brothers really and earnestly desire to bring about the regeneration of India, if they wish to ever bring back the days when the masters, in the ages of India's ancient glory, came freely among them, guiding and teaching the people, then let them cast aside all fear and hesitation, and turn a new leaf in the history of the Theosophical movement. Let them bravely rally around the President Founder, whether I am in India or not, as around those few true Theosophists who have remained loyal throughout, and bid defiance to all calumniators and ambitious malcontents both without and within the Theosophical Society. Path, June, July and August 1892. She being dead yet speaked in the will of the late H.P. Blavatsky, was made the request that her friends should assemble on the anniversary of her death and read passages from the Bhagavad Gita and the Light of Asia. This was accordingly done on May 8, in Adyar, London, New York, and other places. In New York, among other interesting items reported at the time, Mrs. J. Campbell Cately read, after a few introductory remarks, extracts from the private letters of H.P.B. In response to many requests we print these as follows. The remarks, being extemporaneous, are quoted from memory. Mr. President, friends, this being the first occasion upon which I have ever spoken in public, one will ask you to condone my inexperience while one make a few remarks upon the extracts chosen from the letters of Madame Blavatsky to a few friends. In regard to Madame Blavatsky, the world, to use a phrase of Charles Lamb, was the victim of imperfect sympathies. It failed to know her, that failure was its own great loss. Among the many accusations flung at her was one which, at the last ditch, it never failed to make. It said that Madame Blavatsky had no moral ideal. This was false. She had this ideal, she had also the Eastern reverence for an ideal, a reverence to the Western world unknown. We might hence expect to find her teaching that ideal to a great extent under the privacy of a pledge, and there are indications of this in all that has been published concerning the esoteric school. That her ideal was ever present to her mind and heart, these extracts from private letters to her friends will show. Her main teaching can be reduced to the following propositions: that morals have a basis in law and in fact, that moral law is natural law, that evolution makes for righteousness, that the fundamental identity of all souls with the oversoul renders moral contagion possible through the subtle psychic medium, that the spiritual identity of all being renders universal brotherhood the only possible path for truth-seeking men. She distrusted the appeal to sentiment. She saw that existing religions fail in it, that modern civilization frustrates it, that emotionalism is no basis for the will which annuls all temptations of the flesh, and the faith which shall make mountains move. Hence she taught the scientific aspect and bearing of sin. Taught that universal law, in every department, rigidly opposes and avenges the commission of sin, showing the free will of man counterbalanced by the declaration, vengeance is mine, saith the law, I will repay. She taught that the awful responsibility of the occultist, extending down to the least atom of substance, forever forbade our asking that question of Cain which we do ask daily, am I my brother's keeper? She taught that the deep reply reverberated down the ages, as we may read it in our Bibles, what hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth to me from the ground. Justice she taught, and the true discrimination of it, mercy, too, and love. She wrote of one, he has developed an extraordinary hatred to me, but I have loved him too much to hate him. Above all she taught that the pure in heart see God, taught it as a scientific fact, showed it to be, so to say, materially, as well as spiritually possible through the spiritual laws working in the one substance, and, in the showing, lifted our courage higher than the visible stars. The first of these extracts from H.P.B's letters is dated November 29, 1878, and is interesting from the fact that it speaks of the original institution of 3 degrees of the T.S., a fact often disputed in these later days. You will find the aims and purposes of the Theosophical Society in the 2 enclosed circulars. It is a brotherhood of humanity, established to make away with all and every dogmatic religion founded on dead-letter interpretation, and to teach people and every member to believe but in one impersonal God, to rely upon his, man's, own powers, to consider himself his only Savior, to learn the infinitude of the occult psychological powers hidden within his own physical man, to develop these powers, and to give him the assurance of the immortality of his divine spirit and the survival of his soul, to make him regard every man of whatever race, color, or creed, and to prove to him that the only truths revealed to man by superior men, not a god, are contained in the Vedas of the ancient Aryas of India. Finally, to demonstrate to him that there never were, will be, nor are, any miracles, that there can be nothing supernatural in this universe, and that on earth at least the only God is man himself. It lies within his powers to become and to continue a God after the death of his physical body. Our society receives nothing the possibility of which it cannot demonstrate at will. We believe in the phenomena, but we disbelieve in the constant intervention of spirits to produce such phenomena. We maintain that the embodied spirit has more powers to produce them than a disembodied one. We believe in the existence of spirits, but of many classes, the human spirits being but one class of the many. The society requires of its members but the time they can give it without encroaching upon that due to their private affairs. There are 3 degrees of membership. It is but in the highest or third that members have to devote themselves quasi-entirely to the work of the TS. Everyone is eligible, provided he is an honest, pure man or woman, no free lover, and especially no bigoted Christian. We go dead against idolatry, and as much against materialism. Of the 2 unpardonable sins, the first is hypocrisy, Pecksniffianism. Better 100 mistakes through unwise, injudicious sincerity and indiscretion than Tartuffe like saintship as the whitened sepulchre, and rottenness and decay within this is not unpardonable, but very dangerous. Doubt, eternal wavering, it leads one to wreck. One little period passed without doubt, murmuring, and despair, what a gain it would be, a period a mere tithe of what every one of us has had to pass through. But every one forges his own destiny. Those who fall off from our living human Mahatmas to fall into the Saptarishi, the star rishis, are no Theosophists. Allow me to quote from a very esoterically wise and exoterically foolish book, The Work and Production of Some Ancient Friends and Foes. There is more joy in the kingdom of heaven for one repentant sinner than for 99 saints. Let us be just and give to Caesar what is Caesar's, however imperfect, even vicious, Caesar may be. Blessed be the peacemakers, said another old adept of 107 years BC, and the saying is alive and kicks to the present day amongst the masters. The esoteric section is to be a school for earnest theosophists who would learn more than they can from published works. Of the true esoteric tenets there is no room for despotism or ruling in it, no money to pay or make, no glory for me, but a series of misconceptions, slanders, suspicions, and ingratitude in almost an immediate future, one. But if out of the Theosophists who have already pledged themselves I can place on the right-hand true path half a dozen or so, I will die happy. Many are called, few are chosen. Unless they comply with felons you speak of, traced originally by the masters, they cannot succeed. 231 can only show the way taught those whose eyes are open to the truth, whose souls are full of altruism, charity, and love for the whole creation, and who think of themselves last. The blind will never profit by these teachings. They would make of the straight gate a large public thoroughfare leading not to the kingdom of heaven, now and hereafter, to the Buddha Christos in the sanctuary of our innermost souls, but to their own idols with feet of clay. The esoteric section is not of the earthy, it does not interfere with the exoteric administration of lodges, takes no stock in external theosophy, has no officers or staff and needs no halls or meeting rooms. Finally, it requires neither subscription fees nor money, for as I have not so received it, I shall not so impart it, and that I would rather starve in the gutter than take 1 penny for my teaching of sacred truths. Here I am with perhaps a few years or a few months only, Master knoweth to remain on earth in this loathsome, old, ruined body, and I am ready to answer the call of any good theosophist who works for theosophy on the lines traced by the masters, and as ready as the rosier ocean pelican to feed with my heart's blood the chosen 7. He who would have his inheritance before I die, let him ask first. What I have, or rather what I am permitted to give, I will give. Many are called but few are chosen. Well, no need breaking my heart over spilt milk. Come what may, I shall die at my post. Theosophical banner in hand, and while I live I do fervently hope that all the splashes of mud thrown at it will reach me personally. At any rate, I mean to continue protecting the glorious truth with my old carcass so long as it lasts. And when I do drop down for good, I hope in such Theosophists as and to carry on the work and protect the banner of truth in their turn. Oh, I do feel so sick at heart in looking round and perceiving nothing save selfishness, personal vanity, and mean little ambitions. What is this about the soldier not being free? 8. Of course no soldier can be free to move about this physical body wherever he likes. But what has the esoteric one dated December 1st, 1888? Subsequent events proved the prediction true. 2. Her correspondent had quoted the Simla letter of K.H. in the occult world. 3. Referring to the dilemma of an FTS soldier in the army, presented to her. Teaching to do with the outward man? A soldier may be stuck to his sentry box like a barnacle to its ship. And the soldier's ego be free to go where it likes and think what it likes best. No man is required to carry a burden heavier than he can bear, nor do more than it is possible for him to do. A man of means, independent and free from any duty, will have to move about and go, missionary-like, to teach theosophy to the Sadducees and the Gentiles of Christianity. A man tied by his duty to one place has no right to desert it in order to fulfill another duty, let it be however much greater, for the first duty taught in occultism is to do one's duty unflinchingly by every duty. Pardon these seemingly absurd paradoxes and Irish bulls, but I have to repeat this ad nauseam usque for the last month. Shall I risk to be ordered to leave my wife, desert my children and home if one pledge myself, asks one. No, I say, because he who plays truant in one thing will be faithless in another. No real, genuine master will accept a Keela who sacrifices anyone except himself to go to that master. If one cannot, owing to circumstances or his position in life, become a full adept in this existence, let him prepare his mental luggage for the next, so as to be ready at the first call when he is once more reborn. What one has to do before he pledge himself irretrievably is, to probe one's nature to the bottom, for self-discipline is based on self-knowledge. It is said somewhere that self-discipline often leads one to a state of self-confidence which become vanity and pride in the long run. I say, foolish is the man who says so. This may happen only when our motives are of a worldly character or selfish, otherwise, self-confidence is the first step to that kind of will which will make a mountain move. To thine own self be true, and it must follow, as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. The question is whether Polonius meant these for worldly wisdom or for occult knowledge, and by own self the / ego, or the terrestrial personality, or that spark in us which is but the reflection of the one universal ego. But I am dreaming. I had but 4 hours sleep. Give my sincere, fraternal respect to, and let him try to feel my old hand giving him the master's grip, the strong grip of the lion's paw of Punjab, not of the tribe of Judah, across the Atlantic. To you my eternal affection and gratitude. Your H.P.B. To live like cats and dogs in the TS is positively against all rules and wishes of the masters, as against our brotherhood so-called and all its rules. They are disgusted. They look on, and in that look, O Lord, if you could only see it as I have, there's an ocean deep of sad disgust, contempt, and sorrow. The ideal was besmeared with mud, but as it is no golden idol on feet of clay, it stands to this day immovable. And what the profane see is only their own mud thrown with their own hands, and which has created a veil, an impassable barrier between them and the ideal. Without touching the latter. Have a large society, the more the better, all that is off and husk is bountiful away in time, all that is grain will remain. But the seed is in the bad and evil man as well as in the good ones, only it is more difficult to call into life and cause it to germinate. The good husbandman does not stop to pick out the seeds from the handful. He gives them all their chance, and even some of the half-rotten seeds come to life when thrown into good soil. Be that soil. Look at me, the universal theosophical manure, the rope for whose hanging and lashing is made out of the flax I have sown, and each strand it is twisted of represents a mistake, so-called, of mine. Hence, if you fail only 9 times out of 10 in your selections, you are successful 1 time out of 10, and that's more than many other theosophists can say. Those few true souls will bait nucleus for future success, and their children will. Let us sow good, and if evil crops up, it will be blown away by the wind like all other things in this life in its time. I am the mother and the creator of the society, it has my magnetic fluid, and the child has inherited all of its parents' physical, psychical, and spiritual attributes, faults and virtues. If any, therefore I alone, and to a degree, can serve as a lightning conductor of karma for it. I was asked whether I was willing, hen on the point of dying, and I said yes, for it was the only means to save it. Therefore I consented to live, which in my case means to suffer physically during 12 hours of the day, mentally 12 hours of night, when I get rid of the physical shell. It is true about the Kali Yuga. Once that I have offered myself as the goat of atonement, the Kali Yuga recognizes its sound, whereas any other would shrink from such a thing, as I am doomed and overburdened in this life, worse than a poor weak donkey full of sores made to drag uphill a cartload of heavy rocks. You are the first one to whom I tell for Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, the present cycle. Because you force me to the confession, you have a wide and noble prospect before you if you do not lose patience. Try to hear the small voice within. Yes, there are 2 persons in me. But what of that? So there are 2 in you, only mine is conscious and responsible and yours is not. So you are happier than I am. I know you sympathize with me, and you do so because you feel that I have always stood up for you, and will do so to the bitter or the happy end, as Theosophy And H.P.B. He may be moved to doubt, and that is the beginning of wisdom. Well, sir, and my only friend, the crisis is nearing. I am ending my secret doctrine, and you are going to replace me, or take my place in America. I know you will have success if you do not lose heart, but do remain true to the masters and their theosophy and the names. May they help you and allow us to send you our best blessings. There are traitors, conscious and unconscious. There is falsity and there is injudiciousness. Pray do not imagine that because I hold my tongue as bound by my oath and duty I do not know who is who. One must say nothing, however much I may be disgusted. But as the ranks thin around us, and one after the other our best intellectual forces depart, to turn into bitter enemies, I say blessed are the pure-hearted who have only intuition, for intuition is better than intellect. The duty, let alone happiness, of every theosophist and especially esotericist is certainly to help others to carry their burden, but no theosophist or other has the right to sacrifice himself unless he knows for a certainty that by so doing he helps someone and does not sacrifice himself in vain for the empty glory of the abstract virtue. Psychic and vital energy are limited in every man. It is like a capital. If you have $1 a day and spend 2, at the end of the month you will have a deficit of $30. One refuses to pledge himself not to listen without protest to any evil thing said of a brother, as though Buddha, our divine Lord, or Jesus, or any great initiate has ever condemned anyone on hearsay. Ah, poor, blind man, not to know the difference between condemning in words, which is uncharitable, and withdrawing in silent pity from the culprit and thus punishing him, but still giving him a chance to repent of his ways. No man will ever speak ill of his brother without cause and proof of the iniquity of that brother, and he will abstain from all backbiting, slandering, and gossip. No man should ever say behind a brother's back what he would not say openly to his face. Insinuations against one's neighbor are often productive of more evil consequences than gross slander. Every theosophist has to fight and battle against evil, but he must have the courage of his words and actions, and what he does must be done openly and honestly before all. Every pledge or promise unless built upon 4 pillars: absolute sincerity, unflinching determination, unselfishness of purpose, and moral power, which makes the 4th support and equipoises the 3 other pillars, is an insecure building. The pledges of those who are sure of the strength of the 4th alone are recorded. Are you children, that you want marvels? Have you so little faith as to need constant stimulus, as a dying fire needs fuel? Would you let the nucleus of a splendid society die under your hands like a sick man under the hands of a quack? You should never forget what a solemn thing it is for us to exert our powers and raise the dread sentinels that lie at the threshold. They cannot hurt us, but they can avenge themselves be precipitating themselves upon the unprotected neophyte. You Ariel like so many children playing with fire because it is pretty, when you ought to be men studying philosophy for its own sake. If among you there was one who embodied in himself the idea depicted, it would be my duty to relinquish the teacher's chair to him. For it would be the extreme of audacity in me to claim the possession of so many virtues. That the masters do in proportion to their respective temperaments and stages of bodhisattvic development possess such paramitas, constitutes their right to our reverence as our teachers. It should be the aim of each and all of us to strive with all the intensity of our nature to follow and imitate them. Try to realize a thought progresses made step by step, and each step gained by heroic effort withdrawal means despair or timidity. Conquered passions, like slain tigers, can no longer turn and rend you. Be hopeful then, not despairing with each morning's awakening. Try to live through the day in harmony with the higher self. Try is the battle cry taught by the teacher to each pupil. Naught else is expected of you. One who does his best does all that can be asked. There is a moment when even a Buddha ceases to be a sinning mortal and takes his first step toward Buddhahood. The 16 paramitas, virtues, are not for priests and yogis alone, as said, but stand for models for us all to strive after, and neither priest nor yogi, Kila, nor Mahatma, ever attained all at once. The idea that sinners and not saints are expected to enter the path is emphatically stated in the voice of the silence. I do not believe in the success of the TS unless you assimilate master or myself, unless you work with me and them, hand in hand, heart. Yes, let him who offers himself to masters as Aquila, unreservedly. Let him do what he can if he would ever see them. Then things were done because one alone was responsible for the issues. I alone had to bear karma in case of failure and no reward in case of success. I saw the TS would be smashed or that one had to offer myself as the scapegoat for atonement. It is the latter I did. The TS lives, I am killed. Killed in my honor, fame, name, in everything H.P.B held near and dear, for this body is mine and I feel acutely through it. I may err in my powers as H.P.B. I have not worked and toiled for 40 years, playing parts, risking my future reward, and taking karma upon this unfortunate appearance to serve them without being permitted to have some voice in the matter. H.P.B is not infallible. H.P.B is an old, rotten, sick, worn-out body, but it is the best F can have in this cycle. Hence follow the path I show, the masters that are behind, and do not follow me or my path. When I am dead and gone in this body, then will you know the whole truth. Then will you know that I have never, been false to anyone, nor have I deceived anyone, but had many a time to allow them to deceive themselves, for I had no right to interfere with their karma. O ye foolish blind moles, all of you, who is able to offer himself in sacrifice as I did. Theosophical Literature ISIS Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology by H.P. Blavatsky Vol. I Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Vol. 2 Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in photographic facsimile of the original edition, 1877, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with general index and supplementary topical index. American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H.P. Blavatsky Vol. I Cosmogenesis, Slay I plus 676 pages. Volume 2 Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in 1, cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to the Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above, reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of Theosophy by H.P. Blavatsky. Reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H.P. Blavatsky, a blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacarya, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H.P. Blavatsky. Reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H.P. Blavatsky. A collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge, a comprehensive text on the theosophical philosophy by a co-founder of the theosophical movement, widely used as a text in study classes. Reprint of original edition, 1893, 15 plus 182 pages. Indian edition The Bhagavad Gita, rendered into English by William Q. Judge, an ancient dialogue of philosophical religion from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. Cloth, 18 plus 133 pages. Indian edition Notes on the Bhagavad Gita by W. Q. Judge. Indian edition Letters That Have Helped Me by W. Q. Judge. American edition, and shorter Indian edition Forum Answers by William Q. Judge. Reprints from the Theosophical Forum. American edition The Friendly Philosopher, compiled from Letters and Talks by Robert Crosby, 415 pages, cloth. American edition Universal Theosophy by Robert Crosby, Indian edition 5 Years of Theosophy, essays selected from the Theosophist. American edition Order from Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Bangalore 560004, India.